Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jodi.
And I'm Elliot.
And I have some really cool news.
Cool.
So I know that you love to watch our download stats on Libsyn and whatnot, but I'm not sure that you obsessed. But I think your obsession lies primarily at like the dashboard level of the front thing, like just like number of downloads.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have like been thoroughly geeking out on like the stats and the all the levels of the stats and whatnot, and I noticed something really cool.
What's that?
We have a growing and quite sizable listenership, if that's the right word, in the UK.
Really?
Yeah, like 10% of our downloads are coming from the UK.
So they're listening while driving from on the left side of the road.
Possibly.
Nice.
As I try to welcome and give a shout out to our UK listeners, are you now going to like list off a bunch of like totally like stereotypical, like, and they're eating crumpets and drinking tea,
biscuits and things.
No,
yes.
all seriousness aside, welcome. It just made me so happy to imagine like there are people across the ocean listening to us, and then we have a small but hopefully growing, listenership in Japan. But
I know, that's very cool.
It's very cool. I mean, it's like 0.03% or something, or like tiny, but 10%. We actually just cusped over 10% in the UK. So big shout out to our UK folks! Yay!
Nice.
Yeah, and also Canada. We have bunches of people in Canada too, but we've always had them right from the beginning. So yay, Canada. We love you too. Now I feel like Canada feels like they're second to the UK, and I'm really self-conscious, but let's move on. So.
Let's move on. And I do have a
we
story.
love you too, Canada.
Oh, but first, before I get into my story, I do want to thank our patrons.
Oh, please, yes.
Right. First, our premier patron, Mind Over Machines. Thank you so much. Been with us from the beginning, which is so cool. Cat's Copy and the architecture firm of GWWO. We deeply appreciate it.
Yeah. And you can, you can find out more about what it means to be in our patron circle at patreon.com. And you just look up So Here's My Story or SHMS podcast. But one of the perks of becoming a patron is that at any level of patronage, we at least give you one thank you, even if you're not the title sponsors that get mentioned every time. So we have one more new patron, which is Dylan Irving.
Very cool.
So thank you, Dylan. We appreciate your support, and we've appreciated your comments as well. So thank you. Okay. Did you say you have a story?
I do. You ready?
I have one too, but you look so excited.
I'm very excited.
I think you should go.
And I'm a little bit irritated.
I would say chomping at the bit. Yes, you were chomping.
A little bit irritated, a little bit angry, but so let's get started.
Angry.
All
right, let's go.
So here's my story, and it's kind of an angry story. It happened.
Should I make angry sound effects?
No, I'll probably growl during it. And it's an angry parent story.
Oh, those are the angriest.
So my son went away to this convention, and he's part of this youth group, and it was this regional convention. And so the leader of his particular chapter, as with all the other chapters, apparently had prior to this conferred and chosen the most outstanding leader in the particular chapter, the particular group. And so he texted my wife and myself from the convention and says, with a picture of it, because the most outstanding leader award went not to him, but to basically his vice chair. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just that, it wasn't my kid didn't get an award, so I was angry. It was that, trying not to be biased, although I am, the person that got it hardly shows up at events and doesn't do a lot, but there was just one thing that he did. Whereas my son, goes to everything, put his heart and soul in, recruited and all that stuff. And he really, even objectively, I believe, deserved the award. But that's not the point of my story. The point was twofold. First, my wife and I were so angry at the leaders of this group. How could they not see? And so we were determined, and we talked to each other extensively about this. We were determined to actually, I'm going to meet with them, and we're going to explain, because David did this and David did that and David did the other thing, and how could they be so blind and all this stuff. And every time I thought about it, I would get angry. But I was talking to my wife about it, and I said, you know what? We can't meet with these people. We can't. She said, why not? You were right on board with me. You wanted to meet with them. I said, yeah. Well, you know, on the way to get groceries, I told them off in the car. Of course, nobody was in the car and I wasn't on my phone, but I told them off. You know how you have those conversations? I said exactly what I wanted to. And I got satisfaction from it, but the conversation didn't end well because I had to take it to its logical extension, which is, and we're going to discourage our son from even participating if this is the kind of leadership that you exhibit, and going off. Well, he likes it and he gets a lot out of it, and that doesn't work. And so there was no, and so this, because they can't redo the award, and what's done is done.
Please go back in time and give my son the award.
She can. And then my wife said, you know, it's so funny because when I was upstairs and I was just doing some things, I really told them off too. And she said, yeah, I got to the end and there was just nothing, because they said, well, what can we do to make it better? And there was nothing I could say. And all of these imaginary conversations just got me thinking how difficult it is and how hard it is for me personally to take these things that get me so irritated or angry or pent up, and then decide to walk away like it's okay, like you're giving a victory to the other side. And I guess my point is, what do you do with that? What do you do with that anger? How do you just stop? Because it's hard for me to do that. Okay, interesting. Because what I was thinking while you were telling the story was about a couple examples I've heard just recently, really wonderful, wonderful stories of, one was on This American Life of an editor of, I believe, a Texas newspaper who had some people who'd written, you know, really scathing letters come in to talk things through with him and see their side and him see their side. And a similar kind of thing with a video person on YouTube who had some of the people who thought he was awful come in and talk things through. And what interested me about both of those stories was almost that there wasn't a ton of outcome. There actually was some outcome with the newspaper where he was like, oh, okay, I'm going to strive to do that differently or this differently. There were some things, but for the most part, on the whole, the value of it came from just simply being heard. And so my curiosity, so it does not answer your question, so may or may not be helpful, but I wonder where my head was going as you were telling the story was about the value of being heard and seeking to understand. So I guess my thought is, I don't know that there isn't a conversation there, but it seems like it's more a curious one. Like if I were you, I would want to understand what the thinking was. And I would want to sort of say my piece and let them know that I was frustrated and want to hear what their side of it was. It wouldn't change anything. There'd be no outcome from it. Well, there could be. And you're right. There may be an outcome. The outcome could be in a frank exchange of views and people get over it. The outcome could be, look, I'm just telling you this because you're going to do this award in the future for other people, and you ought to take into account certain things that maybe you didn't consider for this time around. But you also run this incredible risk that you're going to be perceived as just being so protective of your kid, number one, or being irrational, or spoiling what had otherwise been a very rewarding relationship because you're seen to be petty. Because you can't always assume that the person on the opposite side of the conversation would be as open to a discussion as you might be in other circumstances. Yeah, see, that's where I think I hear you, because I am I am the worst when it comes to, I so don't want to be that parent who overly defends their child that I'm actually probably dangerously the parent who throws my kid under the bus. Cause I'm like, it was probably my kid. Right, and I'm not overly defending my kid, but if you want to blame some kid, probably blame my kid. It's actually terrible. So I do hear you on that. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot to be said. Actually, I'll back it up. I think there's a lot lost when you try and play out all the different versions of a conversation and then not have it for all those reasons. When to go in because it has been a good relationship. Because I think here's the part that gets skipped over. I think there is this false assumption that, as you put in the first place, how do you stop that feeling and walk away from it? I often think of this metaphor of bricks. Like you're holding this brick of feeling from that incident. If you can truly put it down on the ground and walk away from it, and I mean truly put it down and walk away from it, that's great. That's fine.
But most people don't. They say they're walking away from it, but they've actually put it in their pocket. Like it doesn't go away. You still have that thing is still somewhere in there.
That's right. But you may get used to the weight. But I guess what I'm saying is sometimes carrying it around is more productive and socially acceptable than throwing it at a target.
So I love that. So interesting that those are that's kind of the point. The fact that those feel like your two options is where I think the conversation warrants some expansion, because it's probably more socially, I won't disagree with you that it's more socially acceptable to carry it around. I will heavily disagree with you that it's more productive because it taints things. And I think there are a lot of other options between that and tossing it at someone's head, which could simply be like, pretend it was you and I. Like I could come to you and be like, hey, this is kind of embarrassing, but I am holding this brick and It looks like this and it feels like this. And I super don't want it to look like me defending my kid, but I don't know what to do with it, and just be curious. You're right. That doesn't guarantee the other person can be adult on the other side of it. But I think it's always worth the try. Anyway, that's my
and you're right. I think the temptation is to make it a binary choice. Yes. Either I swallow this or I hurl it with lethal force and accuracy at the other person. I agree with you. It's not necessarily a binary choice, that there are other options. But that, and the gray area is where the magic can happen or it gets really tricky, because there are a lot of emails, and I say emails because it's a very inefficient way of communicating anything that has nuance to it. There are a lot of emails that you want to write in a rant and don't hit send. Because you realize that maybe there are certain bricks you have to carry, or maybe the delivery mechanism isn't what it should be. But the larger point is really when you find, or when I find that I have this emotion, that I am carrying around this brick, what's the decision-making process around whether it is best to carry it, whether you can or how you can put it down, whether it's best to share the load or whether it's best to come together and agree that, you can dissolve it through the collective weight of your scrutiny. And what I'd love to hear, because I know that I'm not the only one that has felt this way. It's not kid stories, but it's just when you've been so tied up, you're wrapped up, whether you're angry over responsibility in a project or in business or something else that I can't enumerate right now. What's your story? What are the bricks you're carrying? Because I know, we talk about this a lot. We have our witness protection line. I'd love to hear where the bricks are. Yeah.
How do you decide when you talk about them, when you confront? I do have a funny story about that fits right in with this. And it is a business story. It was years ago. I had a colleague who had somebody working for him who they were butting heads constantly. And it was kind of new. Like all of a sudden, things were going awry. And she was being pretty disrespectful and snapping at him in meetings and things. And he comes in with me. He asked if he could get some of my thoughts. And he comes in with a those yellow legal notepads on which he has 2 pages of bullet points of his, I don't know what else to call it, but it was like napalm that he wanted to blast at her. Like, you did this and you did that. And of course it was just fraught with the assumptions of what those things meant. You did this. Clearly, you don't think I should have put into this supervisory role. And I'm sorry if you don't think I'm qualified for this, but you work for me for better or for worse. Like, it was this whole, here's the evidence. Here are my interpretations. Here's the conclusions. Here's your sentence. Here's it was the whole thing in one fell swoop. And I said, okay. And his concern was, I don't want to go in and just bash her over the head with all of this. Valid. And I was glad he was concerned about that. So I said, all right, here's my request. You can take in your legal pad, but keep it under the table. Just if you need it, you can go there. I was like, because I know that what I'm asking you to do asking you to try does not come with the sort of false security of thinking you know how the conversation's going to go. Like, you plan it all out. Of course, it never goes that way. Right. So that I really would say that's a false security. So just go in and say, here's what I noticed, or here's what it feels like, or say something like, seems to me that we've been butting heads a lot lately. Just pick one sentence that kind of touches on what you're talking about. have you noticed that too? Something like that, just some opening question. And that's the only part I want you to plan out, and just see what she says and go from there. You can always go back to your list if you need to. And he was like, all right, whatever. Well, he goes and meets with her. 10 minutes later, he comes back out like laughing hysterically. He was like, I need to talk to you for a second. He goes in, he just said that, I'm feeling this way. As soon as he finished his line, she bursts into tears, sobbing. She had gotten married about 6 weeks before that, and they had never lived together before that. And things were like tense, and they weren't getting along particularly well. And she was nervous she made the wrong decision. And she was like, I know I'm snapping at everyone, and I've been meaning to talk to you because I feel terrible. And I know I've been doing it. And I'm embarrassed. And she goes on and on. Had nothing to do with him. Nothing. And he was like, I'm so glad. He's like, I can just imagine if I'd walked in there and she wouldn't have shared that with me. She would have just looked at me and thought, wow, you are such a jerk.
Now, during that conversation, as she's sobbing, did she goes, what's on your paper?
No, that did not happen.
Because that would be a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, if I think back to your story, for all you know, the guy gave the award because that kid's mom's dying of cancer and he won't be. I mean, like you don't know. There's just an infinite. I find we're really bad at predicting people's intent, and sometimes just being curious. I used to want to write this book called Just Say That, because people would call me and say, I need help with this conversation. I'd say, okay, what's the problem? Well, I want to talk to this person about this, but I feel like it always goes sideways really fast. So I'm not even sure how to start it. I don't know what to say because this is really important to me. So I feel like I need to talk about it, but I'm afraid it's going to go sideways. And I really don't want that to happen because they mean a lot to me. I'm like, perfect.
Just say that.
Just say that. Just say that. So that narrative you were having about, I don't want to seem like that parent who's jumping to my kid, I would just say that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'll tell you, now this is where I get off into a rant that can be kind of, not a rant, but a description that can be perceived as kind of sexist, but I'm going to say that anyway.
Oh, great.
That, as you know, great, fantastic.
Perfect.
So, as you know.
could you layer in some misogyny perhaps? Or maybe some racism?
We'll
just like hit as many buttons as possible.
So, at this particular moment in time, I'm the only man that works in my law firm. Mm-hmm.
This particular moment
in time. Okay. You're right. I've had men working for me, but right now, all the women are lawyers, secretaries are lawyers, so I'm the only man that works in my law firm. And I've had meetings with them, with my employees, and at times, particularly if a new employee comes in, and particularly if the new employee happens to be a woman, I would say, look, there are going to be times when I'm going to do something and you're going to go back to your office and wonder, why the hell did he do that? Or why did he say that? Or what was he thinking? And what I would ask you is to assume either good intent, that I meant it in the way that can be interpreted as not being horribly critical and debasing you as a human being, right. Or that I had no thought. Like sometimes I have one thought and it's rattling around in my head like a BB in a tuna can. And maybe I'm just clueless.
Right.
Maybe the thing that's festering in you because you thought it questioned the entire validity of your professional career was just something, it was a clumsy way I phrased thing and there was nothing behind it. And so what I asked them to do is assume, if you can't assume good intent, assume that it wasn't malicious, and chalk it up to cluelessness, and we'll get along much better. So
I'm curious, how good are you at that? Like, are you good at assuming those things?
Yes. Let's say for me, it's been a learned skill.
Yeah.
First of all, I have to say that for most things, I have a thicker skin. So I don't really care. My wife, Nikki, could certainly come home and say, well, she did this or they did that or whatever.
Oh, yeah. I have a theory, like there's the Dante's layer of hell.
Yes.
I have this theory that the closer, it's not really a theory. It's a pretty much scientifically proven thing in my world. The closer someone is to you, that is the thinner the skin. It is just the nature of, nobody can push your buttons like your kids can, it's like,
right. No, that's true. But you also, inverse of that is that the closer somebody is to you, the more license you have to assume better intent, hopefully.
Well, the more responsibility. Okay, so confession, actually, it was kind of a trick question because, I mean, certainly some of us are better at it than others. And I think all of us are better at it in some situations than in others. But there is, and I can't remember if we've discussed this yet, but it's something I end up talking about a lot. So forgive me if we have, but there's a biology to this. There's a neuroscience that when your sense of value feels threatened, which is everything from you shouldn't be wearing, why are you wearing jeans today, to we have to talk about your performance review, to is that what we're having for dinner? When your sense of value feels threatened, you have the same biological fight or flight response in your body and in your brain as if a tiger walked into the room. And what's important about that is I think we all get that at an intellectual level. I'm not sure we all get that at what that means from a neuroscience standpoint. Like it is a biological reaction. You cannot not have it. The best you can do is get better at tempering it, get better at moving past it. And as a leader, I think it's just so important to give people their space to have their reactions and be able to walk them through the anxieties that they have in those moments. So I think anyone, the reason I say it was a trick question, I think if anyone thinks that they're really good at that, they probably aren't.
Well, I agree with you that you can't not have those reactions. So, but there are two parts of it that I see. The first one is what gets close to your values. So if my wife says to me, you know what, that soup you made really wasn't your best, that doesn't get close to my value. I'm sure she's right.
Right.
You
don't hang your hat on your soup making skills.
Correct. Right. I tried, and if it wasn't, fine.
But she said, your podcast sucks.
She said, your podcast sucks. You're a bad Nikki. Interviewer, and it's a waste of it. Yeah, I get really upset.
I can't stand the sound of your voice.
But if it's things that really matter to me, my ability as a lawyer, my ability to relate to people, honesty or integrity, those things I do have a hair trigger. So I think, that's the part of it, what cuts you to the quick. Yeah. And then the second part of it is your ability to kind of separate from the emotion you're experiencing to actually becoming that emotion. Can you at least diagnose yourself as I'm getting really angry, or I'm getting really stressed about this?
I hear that. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
You won't like me. Is there a Clarice at the end of that? Or is that?
Oh, no. That was the Hulk.
Oh, that's the Hulk.
Oh, you're conflating that with the Hulk. Interesting.
I am,
no,
yes.
You're like, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. It was like my favorite show when I was little.
That's true. But at the end it was, what's your secret to turning into the Hulk? I'm always angry. That was Eric Ruffalo's line. But anyway.
So I want to, there's this does wrap back though to what you were talking about, and the just say that is the reason that I find that biology of it so fascinating to me is that I think we all hesitate in these conversations. You started the conversation with a story with your kids, but my God, it certainly happens at work all the time where you have to have this conversation. You're dreading it. You're having the conversation in your head. You're spending 5 hours writing a scathing email that you never send and perfecting it. It's taking up swim lanes in your brain. And at the end of the day, part of the reason I care about that sort of giving over to the fact that there's a biology happening is the reason it comes from another book that I love by, I believe her name is Susan Campbell, but I will double check that. And she has a concept in that book about how to communicate where she says, if you are seeking to, she said, most of us communicate either to get a certain reaction from someone or to avoid a certain reaction in someone. And in her philosophy, if you're doing that, that's not communicating, that's controlling. You're trying to okay, if I say it just this way, then they'll say X, Y, Z, and then I can say X, Y, Z, and then everything will be better. And she's the one that I learned some of that, like the story that I said of just speak to what is, like, hey, I've noticed this thing and it kind of seems like this. And it was the basis of my just say that, that theory. But when you pair that up with the biology of what's going on for another person, to me, it's incredibly relieving because I don't have, it removes me of all fantasy that I can control how this conversation is going to go, which admittedly can be kind of scary. But I think if we're all honest, I mean, can you think of a single conversation where you planned out how you got all your ammunition in line, you got it all planned out, all figured out, I'm going to say this, and then when they say that, I'm going to say that. Has it ever gone the way you thought it was?
No, it never does, because there's a variable of another carbon-based life form. So,
right.
So you can't. And so So what you're talking about is, trying to game plan somebody else's reaction. And you can't do that. But I think there is a recognition that all important conversations, I believe, revolve around needs. I'm happy if my needs are met. I'm unhappy if my needs are not met. And so to your point and to her point, I can't game plan your reaction in order to meet my needs, but I can accurately diagnose what my needs are.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And make space for them to communicate what their needs are.
Right.
Or to even just notice that there are
and
needs.
Try and understand what the other person's needs are. So they might say that for the past 3 days, you walked by my office and asked, Lisa to lunch as if I wasn't sitting in here. Now, That might be what they've observed and that might be what they're telling you, but their need is deeper than that. Their need is to be seen, to be respected, to have friendship, to feel like they're part of something.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is incumbent upon each person, but particularly a leader, to look past what the surface conversation is and try to really identify what's going on here. What's the need in the other person that I either decide to try and fill, hopefully, or I'm okay with the fact that need's not going to be met, and I'll deal with that reaction.
And be honest about that. Say, I get that but that's not happening. That's not something we can do for you here. I find a lot of guidance and wisdom and relief for leadership guidance, I guess I could say, to be redundant about it, in parenting things often. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way at all. I think there's actually some harm if you think of your employees as children, because it's not very respectful. But I saw somebody talking about toddlers one time, and they said, wrangling toddlers gets a lot easier because they can, they dissolve in the middle of a grocery store, or just simply lay down because it's the pink cup instead of the blue cup. It seems irrational, but they said you have to know that every single toddler behavior, they are always just trying to get some need met. And they might be going about it in a really unfortunate decision set of ways. It's the best they have to work with in the moment, but they're trying to get some need met. They're working with what they have, what they think are their good options in the moment, the skill sets that they've developed thus far. And if I think about the people in my life, in business and in life and whatnot, if I can meet them with that same empathy and say like, okay, they are acting really badly right now. Like they're really, really, that's actually when I call on it the most, when I kind of just want to just jump on them. Apparently that's the sound effect for jumping on them.
Yeah.
Which is a terrible sound effect for that, but it sounds nothing like jumping. But
it's the reaction to jumping.
I don't know what that was actually. So that is when I most try and dig deep and meet them with that compassion, and even just simply ask, like, what is, I've even talk about just say that. I've even said that, like, I don't know what's going on here, but like, this isn't working. Like, what's happening for you? What's your experience?
And so that's the important facet of the conversation. And the but that I would raise is this. What you pointed out is that the fight or flight mechanism kicks in. Biologically, this is the same as if
which sucks all the blood out of like the smart, nuanced part of your brain.
Well, that's the important part. So that I may be sitting here in this conversation, and notice I'm casting myself as the rational one, by the way.
I love that.
Go unescaped. But so I may be sitting here in the conversation thinking, okay, well,
wearing my Yoda shirt, because that's me.
Yes, clearly there's a lack of communication here. The call was dropped somewhere. There's a need on the other side that's been unmet, and maybe I can summon all my resources and say, hey, wait a minute, let's take a pause here. What's going on with you? Because this is what I perceive. But I also have to make room for the fact that if the other person has been cut to the quick in something that matters to them and their fight or flight is up, as great, I may follow the perfect, if there was one, the perfect script for relating to another human being. And this may not be the time because they are not in a place where they can relate.
In fight or flight. No, I'm so glad you brought that up. Often it's useful to just acknowledge that and say like, look, I know this is a really hard conversation. So I want to crack the door open, and then I want to give you, take the time this evening, think about it, ponder it. Let's pick up again tomorrow and chat about it, and give them time for their like body to relax and whatnot. They may need to, here's the thing. I think we're all terrified these conversations go awful, but I think part of it is just remembering that you'll be okay on the other side. So what if they yell and scream for a couple seconds? Like you'll live. It's not the end of the world. And to me, it's just maintaining that connection to the compassion and the knowledge that they're working through their reaction. We all do it. I mean, I don't know anyone who hasn't had a tough conversation from their boss and gone home and screamed and yelled and why they think they're awful and horrible and blah, blah, blah. And then you're laying in bed that night. You're like, well, they are right. Though it is true. I didn't do this, this, and this. And I really should probably shape up on that and blah, blah, blah.
Right. Well, that's true. But I will tell you that it is a bragging point for me. I win 100% of the arguments when I'm alone in my car on the commute home.
Sure.
All of them. Yep. And I'm incredibly eloquent. But also in talking through those, when I go home, even talking to myself, I do realize that, yeah, sometimes there's value in that space because I can see, well, they might have a point on that. So sometimes the space and leaving room for not saying something is as important to recognize as, as one of my friends says, if we have a beef, just grill it, let's talk it out. Well, sometimes that's not the best strategy.
Oh my God. I don't know if I can say that with a straight face, but that's brilliant. I like that.
Yeah, that's what he says. Oh, and I
think I need a cowboy hat for that. If we got a beef, just like that, it needs like a Sam Shepard kind of.
It is. It's exactly that's Sam right. Shepard. If you got a beef, let's grill it.
That's a terrible Southern accent.
Well. I'm so far removed.
You don't
from
get to do our
North
Sam
Carolina.
Shepard. No.
I can.
Sorry.
Well, no, I can't do Sam Shepard. But listen, speaking of Sam Shepard, there is one and unmet needs. I do have a need here because I referred.
So you have an unmet need for Sam Shepard?
No, I have an unmet need.
Are you just trying to align with our female audience?
Which is such as they are. No, I referred erroneously to, and this is aligning with our male audience, I referred erroneously to the star of the Hulk as Eric Ruffalo, and I apologize profusely because it's Mark Ruffalo. So I'm
glad we cleared that up.
We needed to clear that up. But speaking of things
and
unsaid,
that disappointingly has nothing to do with Sam Shepard.
Yes.
Which I'm really disappointed about.
Yes, but we might... And this is just a suggestion to our excellent assistant Taylor. Maybe we can stick a picture of Sam Shepard in the show notes.
I'm sure we can work that out.
So that's our story.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful for everyone who's listening in, and we're especially grateful to all of our patrons who've joined us over at patreon.com to support our efforts here. And we hope to see you next week.
And listen. Having told our story, we'd love to hear yours.
Ooh, yeah.
So I guess what we're trying to say is, the floor is yours. Go to sohere'smystory.com and join the conversation.
Wait, before you go, there are 3 things that we really want you to know.
First, you can find show notes and links to all of the random things we happen to mention during the episode by visiting our website, sohere'smystory.com.
The second thing is we like to talk.
And not just to each other.
That's right. So what we really want to hear is your story. So while you're there, you'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and other ways to contact us with questions, suggestions, or even to share your own story.
And if you love the show and want to support future episodes, you'll also find the link to our Patreon page where we share our extra bonus content.
Or if you can't support us financially, it'd be great if you could leave us a 5-star review at iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast service you use to listen to us. And be sure to tell all your friends.
Until next time.